The holiday lights cast a warm glow across my dining room, illuminating the faces of family gathered around the table. Christmas Eve had always been my favorite night of the year, but this one felt different. There was an undercurrent of tension in the air, something electric and dangerous that I couldn't quite identify, but could feel building like static before a lightning strike. My son Paul's fork clinked against his plate with deliberate precision. Each tap a countdown to something I hadn't yet identified but could feel in my bones. The turkey sat untouched on the table, steam rising from its golden skin like a warning I should have heeded hours ago. "Dad, you know the Hendersons just closed on that colonial in Greenwich," my daughter-in-law Kendra said, her voice carrying that practiced casualness that always preceded something calculated. She picked at her cranberry sauce without eating it, her manicured fingers drumming once against her wine glass a tell she didn't know she had. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths. Linda posted photos yesterday. Stunning kitchen. I nodded, keeping my attention on cutting my turkey. 38 years evaluating real estate had taught me to recognize when someone was setting up a pitch. "That's nice for them," I said, my voice measured. "They're younger than us," Paul added, his tone sharpening. Mark's still climbing the ladder at his firm. No inheritance, no help from family. Just made it happen. My 14-year-old grandson, Glenn, shifted in his chair beside me, eyes fixed on his plate. Across from him, Tracy examined her phone with theatrical disinterest, but I caught the tension in her shoulders. The kids knew something was coming. They'd developed the same survival instincts I'd had at their age, back when my own father's moods could turn a dinner into an interrogation. "This house is too big for one person anyway," Paul continued, gesturing with his fork at the colonial dining room around us. The chandelier my late wife had picked out 30 years ago cast warm light over the mahogany table. 4 bedrooms, and you're rattling around here alone. Doesn't make financial sense. There it was, the opening move. "I like my space," I said evenly. "Well, we don't have that luxury." Kendra's smile didn't reach her eyes. 3 years we've been helping you maintain this place, Dad, paying bills, handling repairs, making sure you're not alone. "I never asked you to move in," I said quietly. Paul's jaw tightened, that muscle jumping the way it did when he was about to lose his temper. He'd inherited that from me, though I'd learned to control mine decades ago. He hadn't. That's not the point. He set down his fork with enough force to make Glenn flinch. "The point is, we've found our dream home. Finally, a real opportunity." "Congratulations," I said. "Where is it?" "Lakeview Avenue in Greenwich." Kendra's voice went breathy with excitement, the calculated mask slipping for a moment. "New construction, luxury finishes, 5 bedrooms. The developer is offering a special rate, only $1.34 million. I took a sip of water, buying time to process. Greenwich waterfront property at that price meant either serious structural issues or an inflated appraisal. The seller was hoping some eager buyer wouldn't question. My professional instincts kicked in automatically, cataloging red flags. "That's quite an investment," I said. "It's our future," Paul said. "We need to move fast. They want $100,000 down by January 15th to hold the property." The dining room went silent, except for the old clock in the hallway, ticking away seconds. I could feel all their eyes on me now. Paul's defiant. Kendra's hungry. Tracy's curious. Glenn's worried. $100,000, I repeated. "Cash," Kendra added quickly. "The developer needs cash for the deposit. It's non-negotiable." I set down my water glass and met my son's eyes across the table. "And you're telling me this because—" Paul leaned forward, forearms on the table. "Because you're going to give us the money, Dad. We're family. This house," he gestured broadly, "is worth $847,000. You've got equity. You've got retirement savings. $100,000 is nothing to you, and it's everything to us." "Nothing to me," I said. tasting each word. You know what I mean. Paul's voice had taken on that edge, the one that meant he was about to say something he couldn't take back. You're 67 years old. How much longer are you planning to live in this museum? What are you saving it all for? Paul, I started. No, Dad. We've been patient. We've been here taking care of you, giving up our own lives to make sure you're okay. And now we're asking for one thing, one investment in your son's future, in your grandchildren's future. His voice rose. So here's how this works. You give us that money for the down payment, or you make it very clear where we stand. Where you stand, I asked quietly. Paul pushed his chair back and stood, his 6-foot frame towering over the table. Kendra's hand went to his arm, but it wasn't restraint. It was encouragement. I could read it in the set of her shoulders, the satisfied gleam in her eye. They'd planned this. Either you help this family, Paul said, his voice filling my dining room like ice water, or you're no longer part of it. Your choice, Dad. $100,000, or you'll never see these grandkids again. No more Sunday dinners. No more holidays. You'll die alone in this oversized house with your antique clocks and your professional pride, and no one will be there to care. Tracy's fork clattered against her plate. Glenn's face had gone pale, but I kept my eyes on my son, watching him transform into someone I barely recognized, or perhaps someone I'd been refusing to recognize for a long time. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, 10, 15. Then I stood, my chair scraping against hardwood, with a sound like a door closing. I'll be right back, I said. I walked through the dining room into my study. My footsteps measured and calm, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Behind me, I heard Kendra hiss something to Paul, heard his confident laugh in response. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd come back with a checkbook, with a promise, with capitulation wrapped in a bow. The white envelope sat in my desk drawer, where I'd placed it 4 days ago. Exactly where I'd known I might need it. I picked it up, felt its weight, barely anything, just paper and ink and thought about how something so light could carry such crushing truth. When I returned to the dining room, Paul was already smiling, that cocky, victorious smile that said he'd known all along his ultimatum would work. Kendra's eyes were bright with triumph. Even Tracy had perked up, probably calculating what her share of Greenwich prosperity might look like. Only Glenn looked sick. Asterisk, I placed the envelope on the table in front of Paul's plate. Here, I said simply. Paul picked it up, his fingers confident, as he tore open the seal. I watched his face as he pulled out the document, watched his smile freeze, watched confusion bloom into comprehension, into horror. What? He started. Living trust declaration for the property at 1847 Timber Ridge Road, I said quietly. Dated December 20th, 2024. Notarized and filed with the county recorder's office. I'm the sole beneficiary and trustee. The house cannot be sold, borrowed against, or transferred without my express written consent, which I am under no legal obligation to provide. Paul's face had gone sheet white. Kendra snatched the document from his hands, her eyes scanning the legal language with growing panic. The house is protected, I continued. Any attempt to claim ownership, forge my signature, or fraudulently obtain credit using this property as collateral will be met with immediate legal action. I wanted to make sure we all understood where things stood. You, Paul's voice cracked. This isn't real. You couldn't have, you wouldn't. I did, I said. Met with my lawyer last Thursday, actually. Funny thing about being a real estate appraiser for 38 years, you'll learn which lawyers specialize in asset protection. Kendra stood so fast her chair toppled backward. You spiteful old man. We've given up 3 years of our lives for you. No one asked you to, I said, the calm in my voice surprising even me. You moved in because Paul lost his job and couldn't afford rent. I gave you a home. That was generosity, not indebtedness. This can't be legal. Paul's hands shook as he held the document. You can't just lock us out of our inheritance. It's not your inheritance yet. I picked up my water glass again, took a deliberate sip, and given tonight's conversation, I'm starting to think very carefully about what I leave behind, and to whom. Paul's face cycled through emotions, too fast to catalog. Shock, rage, fear, calculation. Finally, he crumpled the paper in his fist and threw it on the table. This isn't over, Dad. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. He stormed toward the door, Kendra close behind him, already pulling out her phone. Tracy hesitated, looking between her parents and me, before following with obvious reluctance. Glenn remained seated, his young face a mixture of relief and apprehension. Grandpa, he said softly. I put a hand on his shoulder. It's okay, son. Go on upstairs. This doesn't concern you. After he left, I stood alone in my dining room, looking at the cold turkey, the untouched sides, the wine glasses still half full. The crumpled document lay on the table like evidence of a crime that had only just begun to unfold. My hands were steady as I picked up my plate and carried it to the kitchen. 3 years. They'd lived under my roof for 3 years, and I'd convinced myself it was helping them get back on their feet. I'd told myself Paul's increasing demands were just temporary stress, that Kondra's entitlement was just her way of coping with their reduced circumstances. I'd been lying to myself, and tonight, standing in my kitchen loading dishes into the dishwasher, I admitted that I'd known the truth for months, maybe longer. The question was what I was going to do about it. December 26th arrived with that peculiar quiet that follows family explosions. Paul and Kendra stayed upstairs in their room all morning, their door closed, voices occasionally rising in argument, but never quite loud enough for me to hear specific words. Tracy had left before dawn to stay with a friend. Only Glenn ventured downstairs, slipping into my basement workshop, where I was examining a pocket watch from 1892. Can I help? He asked, his voice tentative in the doorway. Always, I gestured to the stool beside my workbench. Hand me the magnifying glass. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the way we had dozens of times over the past 3 years. Glenn had inherited my patience with mechanical things, my appreciation for the precise click of gears fitting together. He didn't have his father's need to fill every silence with words. Grandpa, he finally said, I heard Dad on the phone last night after you went to bed. I kept my eyes on the watch mechanism, though my attention sharpened. Yeah, he was talking to someone about documents, about your name being on things. Glenn's fingers twisted together in his lap. He said something about signatures and how nobody would know the difference. The tiny gear I was holding slipped from my tweezers. I set down my tools carefully, giving myself time to process. What else did you hear? He got mad when whoever he was talking to said it wouldn't work. Then he said, Glenn's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He said they'd find another way, that you'd regret embarrassing them. I looked at my grandson properly then, saw the fear and confusion in his young face, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Paul wasn't going to let this go. The living trust had been a defensive move, but clearly I'd underestimated how far my son might be willing to go. Thank you for telling me, I said quietly. That took courage. Are we in trouble? Glenn asked. No, I said firmly. You're not in trouble. None of this is your fault. But I was beginning to realize that I might be in more trouble than I'd anticipated. The phone call came that afternoon, December 27th, while I was reviewing my bank statements in my study. The caller ID showed First National Bank. Mr. Turner, this is Denise Wallace from our loans department. I'm calling about an application we received for a home equity line of credit. The paperwork shows a request for $45,000 against your property at 1847 Timber Ridge Road. My blood went cold. I didn't submit any application. There was a pause. The application is dated December 15th, sir. It has your signature, what appears to be your signature. We're required to verify these requests by phone before processing. That's not my signature, I said flatly. I want that application canceled immediately, and I want a copy of it sent to me. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Turner, if you're alleging fraud, I'm not alleging, I interrupted. I'm stating someone forged my signature. I want documentation of this attempt. After I hung up, I sat staring at my desk calendar. December 15th. 9 days before the trust was filed. 9 days before the Christmas dinner confrontation. Paul had tried to borrow against my house before I'd even protected it. And when I'd mentioned feeling off about some recent mail, he'd assured me everything was fine, that he'd been helping by sorting through my paperwork. I'd thought he was being considerate. He'd been covering his tracks. I pulled out my file cabinet and started going through financial documents with a methodical attention to detail that had made me good at my job. Credit card statements, bank records, retirement account summaries. Each page I turned revealed new questions, new discrepancies. 3 credit cards I didn't remember opening, all showing my address, all with balances approaching their limits. Total, $67,300. The purchases ranged from luxury handbags to electronics to a week-long trip to Miami. A withdrawal from my retirement account dated August 2023, $34,000. The notation said, emergency family medical expenses. There had been no emergency, no medical crisis, just money that disappeared. And when I'd asked Paul about our finances that fall, he'd assured me everything was fine. I sat back in my chair, the papers spread across my desk like evidence at a crime scene. 3 years. They'd been systematically draining me for 3 years, and I'd been too trusting or too willfully blind to see it. My mind went back to 2021, when Paul had first called to say he'd been let go from the dealership. Restructuring, he'd said. Nothing I could do about it. I'd believed him. I'd offered them a place to stay immediately because that's what fathers do. That's what family does. I remembered helping them move in that September. How Kendra had looked around my house with barely concealed disappointment. How Paul had joked about slumming it in Dad's old place. I'd laughed it off. They were stressed. I'd told myself they'd lost their income, their apartment, their independence. A little resentment was natural, but now I remembered other moments. Paul asking to borrow my credit card for groceries and returning it hours later. Kendra volunteering to help organize my financial paperwork. Mail that went missing. Statements I never saw. Each time I'd questioned something, Paul had an explanation. Each time I doubted, I'd talked myself into trust. Because he was my son. Because I'd raised him to be honest. Because I wanted to believe that whatever mistakes he'd made, whatever struggles he faced, he wouldn't steal from his own father. I'd been wrong. The anger came slowly, building like water behind a dam. Not the explosive rage Paul had shown at dinner, but something colder, more controlled, the kind of anger that comes from realizing you've been played for a fool by someone you loved. I thought about the moment Paul had towered over the Christmas table, his voice full of righteous indignation as he demanded $100,000. The sheer audacity of it. He'd already stolen over $100,000 from me through fraud and identity theft, and he'd had the nerve to demand more while threatening to cut me out of his children's lives. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We need to talk. This isn't over. P. I deleted it. Then I opened my laptop and started searching for lawyers. Not just any lawyer specialists. Estate attorneys. Criminal defense attorneys who handled financial fraud. Because Glenn's warning about his father's phone call had crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. This was about fighting back. By December 29th, I was sitting in Richard Harris's office in Stamford. A folder of documents spread across his conference table. Richard was 52, with silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that comes from spending decades handling other people's worst days. Mr. Turner, he said after reviewing the credit card, statements and bank records, you understand what you have here. Identity theft, fraud, forgery. I kept my voice level. Enough for criminal charges. Yes, Richard tapped the forged loan application. Multiple felonies, actually. Connecticut takes financial exploitation of elderly family members very seriously. If we pursue this criminally, your son and daughter-in-law could face significant prison time. I don't want that, I said quickly. Richard raised an eyebrow. Then what do you want? I thought about Paul's threat, about Kendra's contempt, about the way they'd planned their Christmas ambush, convinced I'd fold under pressure, about 3 years of lies and manipulation and stolen trust. I want my money back, I said. All of it, and I want them to understand there are consequences. Consequences without criminal prosecution. Richard leaned back in his chair. That's going to require a more nuanced approach. I'm listening. We spent 3 hours mapping strategy. Document everything, secure all accounts, file fraud reports with credit agencies, report the forgery attempt to the bank, but hold off on criminal complaints. Build a comprehensive record of every false transaction, every forged signature, every unauthorized use of my identity. The goal, Richard explained, is to create enough legal pressure that they have no choice but to cooperate on your terms. You want repayment? We make non-repayment more painful than paying you back. It was December 31st, when I finally sat alone in my study, a spreadsheet open on my laptop showing the full scope of the theft. $67,300 on fraudulent credit cards, $34,000 from my retirement account, $45,000 attempted through the home equity line, $146,300 total they'd tried to extract from me, and I'd stopped them just short of complete success. Outside my window, Fairfield was preparing for New Year's Eve. Fireworks would light up the sky at midnight. People would toast to new beginnings, fresh starts, better tomorrows. I looked at my spreadsheet, at the neat columns of theft and deception, and felt something settle into place. Not resolution exactly, but clarity. Paul had said I'd have to choose between giving them money or being excluded from the family. He'd been wrong. I wasn't choosing anything. I was taking back control. My fingers moved across the keyboard, updating a document I'd started days ago. Systematic plan for recovery, for justice, for making sure that my son and his wife understood exactly what it meant to steal from someone who'd spent 38 years reading between the lines of real estate deals and spotting fraud in property transactions. They thought I was just an old man with equity and retirement savings. They thought I'd fold under pressure, or guilt, or fear of loneliness. They'd made a fundamental miscalculation. Asterisk. I closed my laptop and looked at the pocket watch on my desk, its mechanism exposed, every gear visible in the lamplight. Broken things could be fixed if you understood how they worked, if you had the patience and skill to realign each component properly. My family was broken, had been for a long time, maybe since before Paul moved in, maybe since before he lost his job. But I was done pretending it could be fixed by pretending it wasn't broken. The clock in the hallway chimed 11. 1 hour until midnight. 1 hour until 22:05. I picked up my phone and opened my notes app. At the top, I typed January objectives. Below it, I began to list what needed to happen next. They wanted $100,000. Fine. They were going to pay me back every cent they'd stolen, whether they wanted to or not. Taylor Bishop arrived at my house on January 2nd, wearing a navy suit that had seen better days and carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had survived a war. He was 44, according to Richard's recommendation, a former forensic auditor who'd traded corporate investigations for private work after getting tired of protecting companies. That didn't deserve protection, Mr. Turner. He shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who'd learned to project confidence. Richard Harris sent over the preliminary documents. I've reviewed the credit card statements and the retirement account withdrawal. We sat in my study, the door closed against any curious ears upstairs. I could hear Zandra's voice drifting down from the second floor, talking on the phone with that forced cheerfulness she used when she wanted something from someone. What I need, I said, spreading the documents across my desk, is a complete picture. Every transaction, every forged signature, every lie they told to get access to my money. Taylor pulled out a laptop and a digital recorder. Walked me through the timeline. When did they move in? September 2021. Paul had just lost his job at the dealership. Said it was restructuring, but I found out later there were financial irregularities in his department. I paused, remembering how eager I'd been to help, how I'd cleared out my spare bedrooms and told them to take all the time they needed. I thought I was being a good father. You were being a trusting father, Taylor said, his tone neutral. There's a difference, but it's not your fault. They exploited it. Over the next hour, I walked him through everything. The mail that had started going missing in early 2022. The times Paul had helped me organize my financial paperwork. The credit cards I'd never applied for but that showed up with my name on them. The retirement account withdrawal that Paul had explained away as emergency family medical expenses when there had been no emergency and no medical crisis. Taylor's fingers flew across his keyboard, creating spreadsheets and timelines with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. I'll need to pull records from the county recorder's office, he said. If they attempted to file property transfer documents, there will be a paper trail, even if the documents were rejected. How long will that take? For the county records? 2 days, maybe 3. For the full financial analysis, he glanced at his laptop. I can have something preliminary by January 5th. That gave me 3 days to watch and wait. 3 days to observe Paul and Zandra with new eyes, knowing exactly what they'd done but saying nothing, letting them think they'd gotten away with it. It was surprisingly easy once I started paying attention to see the signs I'd been ignoring for 3 years. On January 3rd, I came upstairs from my workshop to find Zandra on the couch, scrolling through real estate listings on her phone. She didn't notice me at first, too absorbed in photos of granite countertops and spa bathrooms. When she finally looked up, she quickly switched to a different app, but not before I caught the price tag on the house she'd been viewing. $985,000. Just daydreaming, she said with a brittle smile, looking at what we could have had if you'd been more supportive. I nodded slowly, watching the way her jaw tightened when she said supportive, the word she'd chosen to mean. Willing to hand over $100,000 on demand. That's a nice kitchen, I said mildly. Shame about the market. Her eyes narrowed, trying to determine if I was being sarcastic. I kept my expression neutral, interested, and after a moment, she relaxed. The market will turn around, she said. It always does. And when it does, we'll be ready. With my money, she meant, with the equity in my house or the remains of my retirement account or whatever else they could squeeze out of me before I had the poor taste to die and ruin their inheritance. Timeline. I went to the kitchen to make coffee, and through the doorway I could see her return to her phone, her fingers moving rapidly as she texted someone, probably Paul, strategizing their next move now that the Christmas dinner ambush had failed. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed, filling the kitchen with the smell of fresh grounds, and I thought about how Zandra had started making coffee for me every morning about 6 months ago. She'd presented it as a thoughtful gesture, bringing it to my study with a smile. I'd been touched. Now I wondered what she'd been doing in my study while I drank that coffee, what documents she'd been photographing, what mail she'd been sorting through, what signatures she'd been practicing. That evening, I sat at the dinner table and watched them perform the theater of normalcy. Tracy picked at her food in sullen silence, still angry about being dragged away from her friend's house to participate in family dinners. Glenn ate quietly, occasionally glancing at me with worried eyes. Paul talked about a job interview he had coming up, his voice confident and smooth, the same voice he'd used to explain away every financial irregularity for 3 years. Sales position at a pharmaceutical company, he said. Cutting his chicken with precise movements. Base salary plus commission. Could be looking at 6 figures if I hit my targets. Xandra beamed at him. That's wonderful, honey. See, things are turning around. I made appropriate noises of encouragement while doing the math in my head. If Paul got the job and started in February, if he actually performed well, if the commission structure was as good as he claimed, they might be able to afford ransomware by summer. They might be able to leave my house and take their schemes and their forged signatures somewhere else. But they wouldn't, because they'd already stolen over $100,000 from me, and walking away now would mean losing access to whatever they thought they could still extract. That's good news, I said. I hope it works out. Paul's smile faltered for just a second, a micro-expression that crossed his face before he recovered. He'd expected me to be more enthusiastic, maybe, or more relieved at the prospect of them finally becoming financially independent. He had no idea I was counting every lie, cataloging every manipulation, building a case that would make it impossible for them to walk away without consequences. On January 5th, Taylor Bishop sent me an encrypted email with 3 attachments. I opened them in my study with the door locked, my reading glasses perched on my nose as I absorbed page after page of documented theft. The first attachment detailed the credit card fraud. 3 cards opened between March 2022 and November 2023, all using my social security number and forged signatures. Total charges, $67,300. Taylor had broken down the purchases by category: luxury goods, electronics, travel, dining. He'd even found Instagram posts from Xandra's account showing her wearing a Gucci handbag purchased on one of my fraudulent credit cards, posting from Miami on dates that matched the travel charges. The second attachment covered the attempted property transfers to quitclaim deeds filed with the county recorder's office, both in 2023, both attempting to add Paul's name to my property title, both rejected. The first because the notary seal was suspicious. The second because the property was already in the living trust by the time I filed it. The third attachment was the retirement account withdrawal, $34,000 taken in August 2023, authorized by a power of attorney document that I'd never signed. Taylor had found the bank's original paperwork, and the signature was close, but not close enough. Someone had traced my signature from another document, probably one of my old appraisal reports, but they'd gotten the pressure wrong. The angle of my cursive are slightly off. I sat back in my chair, the documents spread across my desk like evidence at a trial, because that's what this was, really. Not a trial in court, not yet, but a trial of character, of whether I would let them get away with it, or whether I would fight back. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard Harris. Received Bishop's report. Call me when you're ready to proceed. I picked up the phone. I'm ready, I said when Richard answered. File the fraud reports with all 3 credit card companies. File the complaint with the bank about the forged power of attorney. And send Paul and Xandra official notice that we're documenting everything. That's going to escalate things, Richard warned. They'll know you're taking action. Good, I said. Let them know. Let them spend the next few days wondering exactly how much trouble they're in. Richard's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. I'll have the paperwork ready by tomorrow morning. The credit card companies typically respond within 72 hours once fraud is reported with this level of documentation. On January 8th, I sent the fraud reports through Richard's office. By January 10th, I received confirmation that all 3 credit card companies had received the complaints and were launching investigations. By January 12th, Paul and Zandra received letters in the mail. I was in my workshop when I heard Zandra's scream from upstairs. Not a scream of fear, but a scream of rage, the kind that comes from someone who's just realized their careful plans have collapsed. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. The workshop door flew open, and Paul stood there, face flushed, holding a letter that shook in his trembling hand. "You did this." He waved the letter at me. "The credit card companies are demanding immediate repayment of $67,300. They've blocked the accounts, frozen everything." I set down the pocket watch I'd been examining and looked at him calmly. "I reported identity theft because someone used my social security number to open credit cards without my authorization." "You knew about those cards." "I knew about fraud committed using my name," I said. "I know that someone forged my signature, opened accounts illegally, and spent tens of thousands of dollars on luxury goods and vacations I never took. And now the banks know, too." Zandra appeared behind him, her face twisted with fury. "You're destroying us. We're your family." "Family doesn't steal," I said quietly. "Family doesn't forge signatures and commit identity theft. The credit card companies have given you 30 days to pay the full balance, or they're turning this over to collections and prosecuting for fraud." "We don't have $67,000. Paul's voice cracked. "You know we don't have that kind of money." I met his eyes. "Then you shouldn't have spent it." The house became a war zone of silence. Paul and Zandra stopped speaking to me, except through tight-lipped demands or accusations. They stayed upstairs in their room, their voices rising and falling in arguments I couldn't quite hear, but could easily imagine. Tracy disappeared to her friend's house for days at a time. Only Glenn continued to slip down to my workshop, though now he came late at night after his parents were asleep. "They're scared," he told me on January 14th, watching me calibrate the springs on a watch from 1903. "I heard Mom crying. She said they're going to lose everything." "They already lost it," I said, not unkindly. "They spent money that wasn't theirs. Now they have to face the consequences. Are you going to make them go to jail?" I looked at my grandson, at his worried 14-year-old face, and felt a pang of guilt. Not for what I was doing to Paul and Zandra, but for what my son's choices were doing to his children. "I don't want anyone to go to jail," I said, "but I do want justice. There's a difference." On January 16th, I learned that Paul and Zandra had hired a lawyer, not Richard's caliber. This was someone they'd found through a friend of a friend, the kind of attorney who advertises on bus benches and takes cases other lawyers won't touch. I knew because their lawyer called Richard's office, and Richard called me. "They're trying to claim you gave verbal permission for the credit cards," Richard said, his tone suggesting this was both expected and ridiculous. "Their attorney wants to schedule a meeting to discuss a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" "They want you to sign a statement saying you authorized the cards in exchange for them agreeing to pay you back in installments." "Over 5 years," I laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "So, they want me to commit perjury to save them from fraud charges. And in exchange, they'll maybe pay me back $67,000 over 5 years, with no interest and no guarantee. That's the general idea." "Tell them no," I said, "and tell them if they want to discuss this further, it needs to be in a formal meeting with all parties present." On January 23rd, that meeting happened. They'd arranged it at a coffee shop in Fairfield, neutral territory, probably hoping the public setting would keep things civil. Paul and Zandra arrived with their attorney, a sweating man in his 50s named Marcus Webb, who kept mopping his forehead with a handkerchief. I brought Richard, who sat beside me with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. But I hadn't expected the notary. She was young, maybe 25, and she kept glancing at Zandra with the nervousness of someone who'd been promised this would be quick and easy. She had a notary stamp on the table in front of her, and a digital recorder in her purse that I could see peeking out. Richard saw it at the same time I did. His hand went to my arm, a light touch of warning. "Mr. Turner," Marcus Webb began, his voice slick with false friendliness, "we're here today to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding. My clients believe that there was a verbal agreement regarding the financial assistance they've provided you over the past 3 years." "Assistance they provided me?" I interrupted. "I'd love to hear what assistance that was." Webb's smile tightened. "They've been living with you, helping maintain your property, providing companionship. They've been living in my house rent-free while stealing my identity and forging my signatures," I said calmly. "Those aren't the same thing." Zandra leaned forward, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. "Dad, please, we're trying to make this right. We just need you to confirm that you knew about the credit cards, that you were okay with us using them for family expenses." The notary's hand moved toward the recorder. Richard stood up. "This meeting is over. Mr. Turner will not be making these statements, recorded or otherwise, without full legal review." And for the record, he looked directly at the notary. "Any attempt to record this conversation without all parties' explicit consent is illegal in Connecticut, as is notarizing a statement obtained under false pretenses." The notary went pale. She grabbed her stamp and her purse and left the coffee shop so fast she almost knocked over a chair. Webb sputtered, "We're trying to resolve this amicably." "No," Richard said flatly. "You're trying to get my client to provide you with a statement you can use to avoid fraud charges. It's not going to happen. If your clients want to discuss actual repayment, they can do so through proper legal channels. Otherwise, we're done here." We left them sitting at the table, Zandra's careful makeup starting to run with real tears, Paul's face a mask of barely controlled rage, in Richard's car on the way back to his office. I said, "They're getting desperate." "Good," Richard said. "Desperate people make mistakes." He glanced at me. "How far are you willing to push this?" I thought about the $146,300 they'd tried to take from me, about the years of lies and manipulation, about Glenn's worried face and Tracy's sullen anger, and the way my house had become a battlefield. "As far as it takes," I said. On February 1st, the credit card companies sent their official demand letters. Paul and Zandra had until February 28th to pay the full balance of $67,300 or face collections and legal prosecution. That same day, I learned that the bank that was supposed to finance their dream house had rejected their loan application. Their credit scores had tanked with the fraud reports, and no lender would touch them now. The house on Lakeview Avenue was officially out of reach. I found out because Zandra's voice carried through the heating vents one evening, talking to someone on the phone. The bank said, "Our credit is destroyed. We can't get approved for anything. That house is gone. Everything we worked for is gone. And it's all because Robert decided to be vindictive." I smiled in the darkness of my workshop. Vindictive. That's what she called, seeking justice for theft and fraud. On February 7th, Richard called with interesting news. "The retirement account withdrawal," he said. "I've reviewed the power of attorney they used. It's definitely forged, and the bank has acknowledged that their verification process failed. We can sue for recovery, but it's going to take months of litigation." "What's the alternative?" "We make them pay it back directly, not through the courts. Through a promissory, not a formal contract, with payment terms, penalties for missed payments, and legal consequences if they default. Can we enforce that?" "If they sign it, absolutely. And right now, they're desperate enough that they might." On February 10th, I had Richard draft 2 documents. The first was a formal demand for monthly rent $1,800, which was the fair market rate for a 4-bedroom house in Fairfield. The second was a notice that if they didn't begin paying rent, they had 60 days to vacate. I had Richard deliver both documents by certified mail. When Paul came to my study that evening, he didn't knock. He just opened the door and stood there, the letters in his hand, his expression somewhere between disbelief and fury. Rent. His voice was quiet, which was somehow more threatening than if he'd shouted. You're charging your own son rent? I'm charging the people who stole over $100,000 from me for the privilege of continued occupancy of my property, I said. That seems fair. We're your family. Then you should have acted like it. Asterisk, he took a step closer, and for a moment I thought he might actually hit me. His fists were clenched, his breathing rapid, all the charm and manipulation stripped away to reveal the entitled, angry man underneath. But he didn't hit me. Instead, he said, "You'll regret this. When Zandra and I get back on our feet, when we're successful again, you'll regret treating us this way. And when that time comes, don't expect any help from us. Don't expect to see your grandchildren. Don't expect anything." "I already don't expect anything from you, Paul," I said quietly. "That's the difference between us. You thought my money was yours for the taking. I know now that my trust was mine to give, and you broke it." He left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the framed appraisal certificates on my wall. I sat in my study for a long time after that, listening to the old house settle around me, thinking about the path I'd chosen. There was still time to back down, to forgive the debt, to let them stay rent-free, and pretend the last 3 years hadn't happened. But that's what I'd been doing for 3 years already, pretending, ignoring, trusting when I should have been verifying. My phone buzzed with an email from Taylor Bishop. Subject line: Additional findings, timeline of attempted property transfer. I opened it and read through his detailed analysis of when Paul and Zandra had tried to steal my house out from under me. The dates, the forged documents, the careful planning that had gone into each attempt. And that's when I understood exactly how to make them pay for what they'd done. Not just in money, though they would pay that too, but in dreams. In the future, they'd planned using my resources. In the house they'd wanted to buy with my equity. In the comfortable life they'd thought they could build on the foundation of my trust. I opened a new document on my computer and started typing. It was time to show them what real consequences looked like. The certified mail arrived at their door on February 11th. I watched from my study window as Zandra signed for it, her fingers leaving smudges on the electronic tablet the postal worker held out. She turned the thick envelope over in her hands, saw Richard Harris's law firm address on the return label, and her face went tight. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she clutched it to her chest and hurried back inside, calling for Paul. I counted to 30 before their voices started rising upstairs. Couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The eviction notice and rent demand were clear enough. $1,800 per month starting March 1st, or vacate the premises within 30 days. At 67, I'd learned that patience was a weapon most people forgot existed. February 18th brought Paul to my study. He didn't knock this time either. Just pushed open the door with enough force to make the hinges creak. His face was red, veins visible at his temples, the kind of rage that came from someone realizing they'd miscalculated badly. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I set down the gear I'd been examining, part of a pocket watch from 1924, and looked at him calmly. "About the rent. It's quite reasonable for a 4-bedroom house in Fairfield. You know what this is about." He stepped closer to my desk. "You're trying to destroy us. Fine, but you won't see your grandchildren again, ever. We'll move to California, Florida, anywhere you can't reach them. You'll die alone without ever knowing them." I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds. 10. His breathing was rapid, shoulders tense like a boxer, waiting for the bell. "Is that a threat, Paul?" "It's a promise." I picked up my phone and pressed record on the voice memo app, setting it on my desk where he could see it. "Could you repeat that, for the record? You're threatening to prevent me from seeing my grandchildren because I'm asking you to pay fair market rent for my property." His eyes went to the phone, then back to me. Something in his expression shifted, calculation replacing rage. He'd realized his mistake. "This conversation is over," he said, backing toward the door. "But don't think you've won, Dad. We'll find a way out of this." After he left, I sent the recording to Richard with a simple note: "Document this with the others." Richard's response came within minutes. "Documented. This strengthens our position considerably if they pursue any custody or visitation issues." On February 24th, Richard sent the formal legal demand: 30 days to vacate or begin paying $1,800 monthly rent. Attached was a separate document, an invoice for $34,000, the amount stolen from my retirement account, with a payment plan proposal. I didn't expect them to accept it. I expected them to panic. They exceeded my expectations. February 27th, I returned from the hardware store to find Sandra sitting in my living room with rental applications spread across the coffee table. She looked up when I entered, her makeup perfect, despite the red-rimmed eyes. "We're trying," she said, her voice brittle. "We've applied to 6 places, but our credit—" She trailed off, looking at the papers like they were evidence of crimes she hadn't committed. "Your credit is damaged because you committed fraud," I said quietly. "That's not something that goes away with applications." "We made mistakes," her voice rose. "But we're your family. Tracy and Glenn need stability, and you're throwing us out on the street. I'm offering you a chance to stay. $1,800 a month. That's the deal. We don't have that kind of money. Then I suggest you find employment, both of you." She stood, grabbing the applications with shaking hands. "You've changed. The man I knew 3 years ago would never have been this cold. The man you knew 3 years ago didn't know his son and daughter-in-law were stealing from him," I replied. "People change when they discover the truth." On March 1st, they didn't pay rent. The deadline came and went without a check, without a conversation, without acknowledgement. On March 5th, I was having coffee at Miller's Coffee House on Post Road, reading the newspaper, and enjoying the rare quiet when someone called my name. Robert Turner. I looked up to see Gregory Holmes approaching my table, a broad smile on his weathered face. Greg was 61, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that came from decades in real estate development. We'd worked together on property valuations back in the early 2000s before he'd moved into project management. I stood to shake his hand. "It's been, 2 years at least? Mind if I join you?" We spent 20 minutes catching up. His work at Precision Home Development, my retirement, the state of the real estate market in Fairfield County. Ordinary conversation between old colleagues, but something he said caught my attention. "We've got a luxury development in Greenwich that's been sitting for months," Greg said, stirring his coffee. "Beautiful property on Lakeview Avenue, but we can't seem to move it. Market's soft for that price point." My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. Lakeview Avenue. Yeah, 234 Lakeview. Know it. I knew it. The address was burned into my memory from Christmas dinner, from Paul's demands, from Xandra's desperate social media posts about their dream home. "I've heard of it," I said carefully. "What's the issue?" "Honestly, we think the previous appraiser might have been optimistic. Listed at $1.34 million, but we're not getting serious interest. I've been pushing management to bring in an independent evaluator, get a realistic assessment." I took a sip of coffee, buying time while my mind raced through possibilities. "What kind of evaluator are you looking for?" Greg leaned back in his chair. "Someone with your expertise, actually. Residential luxury properties, market analysis, realistic valuations. You interested in some consulting work? We could use someone who isn't afraid to tell us when we're overpriced." The universe, I reflected, had an interesting sense of timing. "I might be," I said. "What's the compensation?" $8,500 a month for about 15 hours of work. Flexible schedule, Mostly property analysis and market reports. I pretended to consider it, though my decision was already made. Send me the details. I'll take a look. We finished our coffee talking about old projects, old colleagues, the way the industry had changed. When we parted ways in the parking lot, Greg handed me his business card. Really glad I ran into you, Robert. We need people who aren't yes-men. I pocketed the card and drove home, my mind already working through the implications. Paul and Zandra's dream house, the property they demanded $100,000 to purchase, was owned by a company that wanted to hire me to evaluate whether it was overpriced. The symmetry was almost poetic. March 12th arrived with paperwork from Precision, home development employment contract, non-disclosure agreement, project list. I signed everything in Richard's office with my attorney, reviewing each clause to ensure there were no conflicts of interest. This is legitimate consulting work, Richard confirmed. You're providing professional real estate appraisal services. The fact that one of their properties happens to be relevant to your personal situation is coincidental. Entirely coincidental, I agreed, though we both knew better. That evening, I sat in my study reviewing the project files Greg had sent over. Third on the list, 234 Lakeview Avenue, Greenwich, CT luxury new construction, 5 bedrooms. Currently listed at $1,340,000. My job was to provide an independent market analysis. I pulled up comparable sales, recent transactions, market trends. The work was familiar, methodical, the kind of analysis I'd done thousands of times. But this time, every number carried additional weight. My preliminary assessment suggested the listing price was inflated by at least 15%. Upstairs, I could hear Zandra's voice through the heating vents, talking on the phone with someone. Her tone was desperate, pleading. We just need 3 months to get on our feet. Can't you talk to your parents about a loan? Whoever she was talking to apparently said no. On March 20th, Paul found work as a sales representative for a pharmaceutical supply company base salary of $3,400 monthly, plus commission that might never materialize. Zandra took a position at a retail store in Stamford, working 40 hours a week for $2,800 a month. Their combined income was $6,200. After taxes, probably closer to $4,800. Not enough to pay me $2,400 a month and still cover their other expenses. The math was simple. They were drowning. On March 20th, a letter arrived from First National Bank, forwarding Paul and Zandra's case to Consolidated Credit Recovery, a collections agency. The $67,300 in fraudulent credit card debt was now officially in collections. I learned this because Paul left the letter on the kitchen counter where I saw it while making coffee. His handwriting scrolled across the top. Call them Monday. Try to negotiate. Good luck negotiating when you're already behind on everything else, I thought. March 26th was the deadline, 30 days since the eviction notice. 30 days to either pay rent or leave. They requested a meeting. Richard, Paul, Zandra, and me sitting around my dining room table, like we were negotiating a business merger instead of the terms of their continued residence in my house. Paul spoke first, his voice careful, controlled. We found employment, both of us. We can start making payments. How much? Richard asked, pen poised over his legal pad. We can do $1,200 a month, Sandra said quickly. It's what we can afford right now. Once Paul's commission kicks in, the rent is $1,800. I interrupted. That's non-negotiable. We can't, Paul started. Then you have 14 days to vacate. Zandra's carefully maintained composure cracked. Where are we supposed to go? No one will rent to us with our credit. You're backing us into a corner. You backed yourselves into a corner when you stole from me, I said quietly. I'm offering you a solution. Pay what you owe or leave. Richard slid a document across the table. There's also the matter of the $34,000 from Mr. Turner's retirement account. We're proposing a promissory note with monthly payments of $600 in addition to the $1,800 in rent. Total monthly obligation, $2,400. I watched Paul's face as he did the math, watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched his jaw clench so hard I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. His hands rested on the table, curled into fists. $2,400 a month, he repeated, his voice hollow. You know that's almost impossible. Then make it possible, I said, or file for bankruptcy and leave. Those are your options. Sandra looked like she wanted to throw something. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms, leaving red crescents. Her breathing was rapid, shallow, the kind that comes before tears or screaming. But she didn't scream. Instead, she turned to Paul. Sign it, Paul. Sign it. We don't have anywhere else to go. Paul reached for the pen with a trembling hand. I'd seen that tremor before in people who'd just realized they'd lost everything. He scrawled his signature across the promissory note, each stroke of the pen like an admission of defeat. When he finished, he looked at me with something that wasn't quite hate, but wasn't far from it. You're enjoying this. I'm ensuring you face consequences for your actions, I said. If that brings me satisfaction, it's because justice should be satisfying. They left the table without another word. I heard their footsteps heavy on the stairs, heard their bedroom door slam hard enough to rattle the windows. Richard gathered the signed documents, slipping them into his briefcase with the efficiency of someone who'd handled hundreds of similar cases. First payment is due April 1st. If they miss it, I know, I said. Eviction proceedings begin immediately. After Richard left, I went down to my workshop. Glenn was already there, sitting on his usual stool, hands folded in his lap. I heard, he said quietly, $2,4. They made their choices, I said, picking up the tools I'd left scattered on my workbench. Now they live with them. What happens if they can't pay? Then they leave. I selected a tiny screwdriver, began working on the watch mechanism I'd been restoring for weeks, and they learned that stealing has consequences. Glenn watched me work in silence for a while, then asked, Grandpa, what are you building toward? I looked at my grandson and his serious 14-year-old face, and saw an intelligence that reminded me of myself at that age. Observant, thoughtful, able to see patterns where others saw chaos. Justice, I said simply. I'm building toward justice. On March 28th, my first paycheck from Precision Home Development arrived. $8,500. I deposited it into my account and sat in my study, looking at the project list Greg had sent over. Tomorrow, I would begin my evaluation of 234 Lakeview Avenue, the house Paul and Sandra had demanded I finance, the dream they'd been willing to threaten and manipulate to obtain. I opened a new document on my computer and started typing my preliminary market analysis notes. The work was professional, thorough, based purely on comparable sales and market data, but I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a certain satisfaction in knowing that my professional expertise was about to play a role in their dreams. Crumbling even further, Glenn's question echoed in my mind. What are you building toward? The answer was simple. I was building toward the moment when Paul and Sandra would realize that every dollar they'd stolen, every signature they'd forged, every lie they'd told had consequences far beyond what they'd imagined, and I was going to make sure those consequences were thorough, legal, and utterly inescapable. The watch on my workbench ticked steadily, each gear meshing perfectly with the next. Broken things could be fixed if you understood their mechanisms. Stolen time could be restored if you were patient enough to work through each component. Justice, I'd learned, worked the same way. April 3rd arrived with the kind of crisp spring morning that made Connecticut beautiful. I drove to Precision Home Development's office in Greenwich, my briefcase containing project files and my laptop loaded with comparable property data. Greg met me in the conference room. Coffee already waiting. Robert, good to see you. Let's go over the new assignments. He spread a list of properties across the table. Residential developments, luxury homes, commercial projects. My eyes caught on the third item. 234 Lakeview Avenue, Greenwich. I kept my expression neutral, professional. This one's been on the market a while, Greg said, tapping the file. 4 months without serious interest. Management's getting nervous. The listing price is $1.34 million, but we're wondering if that's realistic. We need an honest assessment, not wishful thinking. I picked up the file, flipped through the specifications. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, luxury finishes throughout. The same house Paul had demanded $100,000 to purchase. The same house Sandra had posted about on her social media, calling it our future dream home. The irony was so perfect, it almost hurt. I can have a preliminary report by April 8th, I said. Full analysis with comparable sales, market trends, realistic valuation. That's exactly what we need. No one's going to question your numbers. You wrote the book on fair market valuation in Fairfield County. I spent the next 3 days doing what I'd done for 38 years, valuating property. I drove to Lakeview Avenue, walked the house, took measurements, examined finishes. The construction was solid, but not exceptional. The location was good, but not premium. The asking price was inflated by at least 15% based on recent comparable sales. My report was thorough, professional, and damning, based on current market conditions and comparable sales analysis of similar properties in Greenwich. The fair market value of Lakeview Avenue is approximately $1,150,000. Current listing price of $1,340,000 represents a 19.6% premium over market value. I submitted the report on April 8th. By April 10th, Precision Home Development had lowered the listing price to $1,150,000. On April 12th, the new price went public. That evening, I was in my workshop when I heard Zandra's voice from upstairs, sharp with disbelief. Paul, come look at this. Asterisk there, footsteps thundered overhead. I set down my tools and listened. The house on Lakeview dropped to $1.15. Zandra's voice carried through the heating vents. It's down $190,000. We couldn't buy it then either, Paul said, his voice heavy with defeat. Our credit was already tanking. But still, we could have done a lot of things if Dad hadn't sabotaged us. I allowed myself a small smile. They still didn't know. Didn't realize that their dream house belonged to the company that employed me. That I was the one who'd evaluated it. That my professional expertise had been the instrument of the price. Reduction, sometimes the best revenge, was the kind people didn't even know was happening. April 1st had brought their first rent payment. $2,400 delivered by check with Paul's signature scrawled so hard, it nearly tore the paper. I deposited it, without comment, watching their bank account balance drop, and knowing exactly how much that payment hurt. Their combined income was $6,200 monthly after taxes, closer to $4,800. The $2,400, to me, left them with $2,400 for everything else. Food, utilities, gas, car insurance, phone bills. They were living paycheck to paycheck, every dollar accounted for. The life of luxury they'd built on my stolen money, evaporating like morning dew. I'd see them sometimes in the kitchen, Sandra calculating bills on her phone, Paul staring at nothing with the hollow eyes of someone who'd realized too late that actions have consequences. The expensive dinners out had stopped. The designer clothes Sandra used to wear had been relegated to the back of her closet, replaced by discount store basics. Her Instagram, once full of carefully curated shots of prosperity, had gone silent. On April 18th, I was reading in my study when raised voices erupted upstairs. Not Paul and Sandra this time, Tracy and her mother. You lied to me. Tracy's voice cracked with betrayal. Grandpa never gave you permission. These are forged signatures. Glenn showed me the documents. Tracy, sweetie, you don't understand, Zandra started. I understand perfectly. You stole from him. You used his identity to buy all your expensive stuff, and now you're trying to make him the villain. We're your parents. You should be on our side. I'm on the side of people who don't commit fraud. A door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Minutes later, I heard Tracy's footsteps coming down to the basement. She appeared in my workshop doorway, face flushed, eyes red. Can I stay down here for a while? She asked quietly. Of course, I gestured to the spare stool. Want to help with this pocket watch? The spring mechanism needs adjustment. We worked in silence for 20 minutes before she spoke again. I didn't know about what they did. I thought you were being mean, making them pay rent when they were struggling. And now I know they created their own struggle. She carefully handed me a tiny gear. Glenn tried to tell me, but I didn't want to listen. I wanted to believe Mom's version, where you were the bad guy. It's easier to believe the version where someone else is at fault, I said. Takes courage to face uncomfortable truth. She looked at me, the 16-year-old who was learning that her parents weren't who she'd thought they were. Are you going to make them leave? Only if they don't keep up their payments. The promissory note is clear. $2,400 a month. They miss a payment. They're in default. Do you think they'll make it? I thought about their financial situation. The collections agency breathing down their necks. The court date looming for the $67,300 in fraudulent charges. I think they'll try very hard, I said. Whether they succeed depends on choices they make going forward. On April 20th, I met with Greg at the Precision Home office. He had news about Lakeview Avenue. We've got a potential buyer, he said, pulling up an email on his computer. Young executive couple, pre-approved for financing, but they're cautious. Want an independent second appraisal before they commit. Would you be willing to do another evaluation? More detailed this time, looking for any issues that might affect value. When do they need it? By May 15th would be ideal. I agreed, already knowing what a more thorough inspection might reveal. Houses always had hidden issues. The question was whether those issues were significant enough to warrant another price adjustment. As I drove home, I thought about the layers of irony stacking up. Paul and Zandra's dream house slipping further from reach with every professional report I filed. The money they'd stolen from me now funding my ability to systematically dismantle their aspirations. Justice, I'd learned, didn't always look like courtrooms and handcuffs. Sometimes it looked like market analysis reports and comparative sales data. Sometimes it was methodical, professional, and utterly legal, and sometimes that was the most satisfying kind of all. April 25th was unseasonably warm. I stood in the empty house at 234 Lakeview Avenue, clipboard in hand, examining every corner with the attention to detail that came from decades of practice. The finishes were impressive at first. Glazed granite countertops, hardwood floors, high-end appliances. But I wasn't looking at surfaces. I was looking at structure, foundation, systems that kept a house functional beyond its cosmetic appeal. In the basement, I found hairline cracks in the foundation wall, not catastrophic, but concerning. Evidence of minor water infiltration, old, but present. The drainage system around the foundation was improperly graded, directing water toward the house instead of away from it. In the crawl space, I found improper ventilation that would lead to moisture problems within 5 years. I documented everything with photos and notes. Then I calculated the cost to remedy these issues. Foundation repair, drainage correction, crawl space ventilation upgrade, approximately $45,000 of work that any informed buyer would need to address. My report was clear. While the property presents well cosmetically, structural inspection reveals foundation drainage issues and ventilation deficiencies that will require an estimated $45,000 in remedial work. Adjusted market value, accounting for necessary repairs, $1,105,000. I submitted the report on April 30th. On May 2nd, my phone rang. Paul's voice was tight, with barely controlled fury. I know what you're doing. I set down the watch I'd been repairing. What am I doing, Paul? That house on Lakeview, it dropped again, down to $1.1 million. A friend who's a realtor told me the developer cited structural issues in their latest evaluation report. His voice rose. You're working for them, aren't you? You're deliberately destroying that house's value. I'm doing professional real estate appraisal, I said calmly. If a property has issues that affect its value, I have an ethical obligation to report them. Do you have a problem with professional ethics? The silence on his end was loaded with impotent rage. He knew I was involved, knew I was influencing the price, knew that every dollar the house dropped was another nail in the coffin of their dreams. But he also knew he couldn't do anything about it. My work was legitimate, professional, based on objective analysis. The fact that it happened to align with my personal satisfaction was simply fortunate timing. You're destroying us, he said quietly. No, Paul, you destroyed yourselves when you stole from me, I said. I'm just ensuring you face the consequences. He hung up without another word. On May 8th, Sandra came to my study. She'd lost weight over the past month, her face drawn, the designer clothes replaced with generic brands. She stood in my doorway, looking smaller, somehow diminished. I found a house, she said without preamble, in Stamford, $485,000. Not Greenwich, but it's decent. Decent neighborhood, good schools for the kids. Congratulations. We need to get pre-approved for the mortgage. She swallowed. I was hoping you might write a letter to the bank explaining that we're current on our rent payments to you, that we're reliable. I looked at her, this woman who'd spent $8,450 of my stolen money on designer handbags. What's your credit score right now? Her jaw tightened. 520. The collections agency filed their claim. Yes, and you think a letter from me will convince a bank to lend you $500,000 when your credit score is in the basement and you're actively in collections? I thought. Her voice cracked. I thought maybe you'd help for Tracy and Glenn. They deserve stability. Tracy and Glenn have stability. They live in my house, which isn't going anywhere. You and Paul are the ones who created this situation. Every consequence you're facing is the direct result of choices you made. We made mistakes. Asterisk, you committed fraud multiple times, systematically over 3 years. I kept my voice level. A mistake is an accident. What you did was deliberate theft. She left without another word. That evening, I heard her crying through the walls, the sound muffled but unmistakable. I felt no satisfaction in her tears. Just a quiet certainty that consequences were finally arriving where they belonged. On May 12th, a certified letter arrived. Consolidated Credit Recovery had filed a lawsuit against Paul and Sandra Turner for the sum of $67,300 plus interest and legal fees. Court date, June 16th. That evening, they came to my study together. Paul's face was pale, Sandra's eyes red-rimmed. We need help, Paul said without pretense. The collections agency is suing us. If they get a judgment, they can garnish our wages, seize our assets. We'll lose everything. What do you want from me? Help us settle. Talk to them. Maybe if you, he stopped, realizing how absurd it sounded. Maybe if you what? Testified that you didn't commit fraud, vouched for your character, paid your debt for you. Sandra stepped forward. We'll pay you back every cent. Just help us with this one thing, and you're paying me back, I interrupted. $600 a month toward the $34,000 you stole from my retirement. At that rate, you'll be done in about 57 months. As for the $67,000 you charged to fraudulent credit cards, That's your problem. You made those charges. You deal with the consequences. We could declare bankruptcy, Paul said, the words bitter in his mouth. You could, I said. That's your right. But it won't eliminate the promissory note you signed. That debt to me survives bankruptcy, and if you file, I'll have grounds to evict you immediately for material adverse change in financial circumstances. They stood there, trapped by the web of consequences they'd woven themselves. Every avenue of escape I'd systematically closed. Every easy solution I'd already blocked. Asterisk, you can negotiate a payment plan with the collections agency, I said. They'll usually accept monthly payments rather than pursuing a judgment. It'll cost you more in the long run with interest, but it's better than garnishment. After they left, I pulled up the final appraisal report for 234 Lakeview Avenue. Sent it to Greg on May 15th, as requested. The potential buyers had reviewed it, seen the foundation issues and required repairs, and withdrawn their offer. Greg's email response: they're passing. Property is going to sit for a while. Might need to drop price further to find a buyer willing to take on the repairs. Thinking $980,000 might be where we land. $980,000. $360,000, less than what Paul had wanted me to finance with $100,000 down. I closed my laptop and went down to my workshop. Glenn was already there, working on a clock movement we'd been restoring together. Dad and Mom are freaking out, he said quietly. They got sued. I know. Asterisk, is that part of your plan? No, that's a consequence of their choices. The collections agency would have sued regardless of anything I did. But, yes, it's convenient timing. They hate you now. I looked at my grandson. They hated me when I said no to $100,000. They hated me when I protected my house. They've hated me every time I refused to be their victim. Their hatred isn't new. It's just honest now. Glenn nodded slowly. Tracy moved into the spare bedroom. Said she can't stand being near Mom anymore. How's she doing? Better. She talks to me now. Actually talks. Not just complaining about stuff. He adjusted a tiny gear. She wants to learn clock restoration, too. She's welcome anytime. We worked in comfortable silence, above us, through the walls and floors. I could hear Paul and Sandra's voices rising and falling in argument about money, about the lawsuit, about their ruined dreams. Their dream house had dropped from $1,340,000 to an estimated $980,000. My professional evaluations, based on objective market analysis and structural inspection, had carved $360,000 from their aspirations. And the beautiful thing was, it was all completely legal, all professional, all based on sound real estate appraisal principles. I'd been applying for nearly 4 decades. Sometimes revenge didn't need to be elaborate. Sometimes it just needed to be thorough. May rolled into June with the kind of relentless heat that made Connecticut feel like a different state entirely. I watched it all from my air-conditioned study, tracking numbers on spreadsheets with the same methodical attention I'd once applied to property valuations. Paul and Sandra's financial situation was deteriorating like a house with a bad foundation. Slowly at first, then catastrophically. Their social media told the story better than any report could. Sandra's Instagram, once a carefully curated gallery of designer handbags and restaurant meals, had gone dark. The last post from mid-April showed a generic sunset with a caption about appreciating simple things. The comments were sparse. Her high school friends, the ones she'd been so desperate to impress, had stopped engaging entirely. I knew because Tracy showed me, sitting in my workshop on May 25th, with her phone tilted toward me. Mom deleted almost everything. All the Miami photos, the designer stuff, even pictures of the house on Lakeview. People notice when prosperity disappears, I said, adjusting the mainspring on a pocket watch from 1912, especially people who only valued the prosperity to begin with. Tracy had become a fixture in my workshop over the past month, her transformation from sullen teenager parroting. Her mother's entitlement to thoughtful young woman was one of the few genuinely pleasant developments in this entire mess. She picked up a tiny gear, examining it in the light. Glenn says you're teaching him patience, that every gear has to be exactly right, or the whole mechanism fails. That's true for watches, I said. Also true for justice. She looked at me with eyes that reminded me of her grandfather, my father, who'd taught me that integrity wasn't negotiable. Is that what this is? Justice? What would you call it? I'd call it watching someone face consequences they spent 3 years avoiding. She set down the gear carefully, which I guess is the definition of justice. Upstairs, I could hear Xandra's voice on the phone. The desperation, barely masked by forced cheerfulness, trying to find extra hours at the retail store, begging for shifts. The woman who'd once posted about spa days and shopping trips, now pleading for the chance to work evenings and weekends. On June 3rd, Paul received the call that would cement their fate for the next year. I was in my study when I heard his phone ring, heard his cautious greeting turn into long silence. From my position at my desk, I couldn't see him, but I could imagine his face, that particular shade of gray that came with recognizing inevitable defeat. What are the terms? He asked finally, his voice flat. More silence. Then, $72,458. That's with interest. Pause. 12 months. $6,038 per month. His voice cracked slightly. Fine. Send the paperwork. When he came down the stairs 10 minutes later, he looked like he'd aged a decade. He stood in my study doorway, not entering, just hovering there like a man waiting for execution. The collections agency, he said. They're offering a payment plan. 12 months, $6,038 monthly, or they take us to court and get a judgment. I set down my pen. That's generous of them. A court judgment would allow wage, garnishment, and asset seizure. We don't have $6,000 a month to spare. With what we're paying you, we're already drowning. Then you'll need to earn more. His laugh was bitter, hollow. Earn more, right? Because jobs are just lying around for people with my record and credit score. You found your current position. Find another one. Work 2 jobs. Xandra can increase her hours. I kept my voice neutral, professional. These are the consequences of spending $67,300 that didn't belong to you. You enjoy this, he said. It wasn't a question. Watching us struggle, watching us lose everything. I enjoy justice being served, I said. There's a difference. He left without another word. On June 8th, I reviewed my own financial records. 5 months since Paul and Xandra had begun their payments to me. $2,400 monthly. $12,000 total toward the $34,000 they'd stolen from my retirement account. $22,000 remaining. At current rates, another 11 months of payments. I did the math on their total obligations. To me, $2,400 monthly for 11 more months. To the collections agency, $6,038 monthly for 12 months. Total monthly obligation, $8,438. Their combined income, approximately $6,200 before taxes. Maybe $4,800 after. The numbers didn't work. They'd need to nearly double their income just to meet their obligations, let alone pay for food, utilities, transportation. It was mathematically elegant, really. They'd created a trap for themselves that had no easy escape. Bankruptcy wouldn't discharge the promissory note to me. Defaulting on either debt would trigger immediate consequences: eviction from me, legal judgment from the collections agency. They were, quite simply, stuck. On June 12th, an envelope arrived from Precision Home Development. I opened it in my study, already knowing what it would say. Greg's email had been enthusiastic. Robert, the board is thrilled with your work. Your evaluations have been consistently accurate and professional. We'd like to extend your contract for another year, with a rate increase to $9,200 per month. The letter formalized the offer. I signed it and returned it the same day. That evening, Glenn found me in my workshop, cleaning tools and organizing my workbench. He sat on his usual stool, quiet for a long moment, before speaking. "Dad's been looking for second jobs," he said. "I heard him on the phone with some warehouse that does night shifts. That's practical. Mom's trying to get promoted to assistant manager at her store. She thinks it might mean an extra $400 a month." I nodded, making notes in my ledger, the pocket watch collection I maintained as inventory, each piece documented with purchase price, estimated value, restoration costs. "Grandpa," Glenn said carefully, "why do you still let them live here?" It was a fair question. I could have evicted them back in March, could have forced them onto the street, with their ruined credit and mounting debts. It would have been legal, justified, satisfying in any immediate way. "Because justice isn't just about punishment," I said, setting down my pen. "It's about learning. If I throw them out, they become victims in their own story. Poor Paul and Xandra, destroyed by Robert's cruelty. But if they stay here, paying every month, watching their lifestyle shrink while they repay what they stole, that's a lesson they'll remember. You think they'll actually learn? I think they won't steal from anyone else." I looked at my grandson. "Sometimes that's the best you can hope for." Glenn nodded slowly, then picked up the watch I'd been working on, an 1887 pocket watch, nearly complete after weeks of careful restoration. "Tracy wants to help with this one," he said. "She says she likes that broken things can be fixed if you're patient enough." I smiled. "Then we'll work on it together. All three of us. Outside my workshop, upstairs in the house they tried to steal. Paul and Xandra were drowning in the consequences of their choices, their credit destroyed, their dreams demolished, their future mortgaged to repay the debts they'd created. And down in my basement workshop, surrounded by the precise mechanisms of antique timepieces, I felt something settle into place. Not quite satisfaction, not quite peace, but something close to both. Justice, I'd learned, didn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it ticked away quietly, methodical and inevitable. Like the gears of a well-maintained watch, June 16th arrived with clear skies and the kind of heat that made the courthouse steps shimmer. I didn't attend the hearing. Paul and Xandra's legal battle with Consolidated Credit Recovery didn't require my presence. But I received Richard Harris's text at 11:30. Settlement approved. 12 monthly payments of $6,038. They're locked in. Asterisk, I was having coffee at Miller's when the text arrived. I read it twice, set down my phone, and allowed myself a moment of genuine satisfaction. On June 20th, I called a family meeting. They assembled in my dining room at 2 o'clock. Paul, Xandra, Tracy, and Glenn. Richard Harris sat beside me, his briefcase open. Legal documents arranged with precise efficiency. I'd asked Tracy and Glenn to be present because they deserved to understand what had happened, to see that actions had consequences, that theft and manipulation didn't go unpunished, that sometimes the person you're trying to victimize is stronger than you realized. Paul and Xandra sat across from me, their faces showing the strain of 6 months of financial pressure. Paul had lost weight, his shirt collar loose around his neck. Xandra's carefully maintained appearance had crumbled, no makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, the designer clothes replaced with discount store basics. I laid out the documents on the table, one by one. The credit card statements, showing $67,300 in fraudulent charges. The forged power of attorney used to steal $34,000 from my retirement account. The 2 attempted quit-claim deeds with forged signatures. Taylor Bishop's investigation report. Bank records. Everything. For 3 years, I said, my voice calm and measured, you systematically stole from me. You used my identity to open credit cards and spent the money on luxury goods, vacations, and lifestyle expenses. You forged my signature to withdraw my retirement savings. You attempted twice to steal my house through fraudulent property transfers. Zandra's face had gone pale. Paul stared at the documents like they were evidence at his own trial. The total amount you stole or attempted to steal, $146,300. Credit cards, retirement account, attempted home equity line. I let that number hang in the air. When that wasn't enough, you demanded $100,000 more for a down payment on a house you couldn't afford. We made mistakes, Paul started. You committed fraud, I interrupted. Multiple felonies. Identity theft, forgery. I have enough evidence here to press criminal charges that would send both of you to prison. Zandra's hand went to her mouth. Tracy sat very still, watching. But I didn't, I continued. Instead, I gave you a choice. Pay back what you stole, or face prosecution. You chose to pay. I pulled out a ledger, opened it to show the payment records. In 5 months, you've paid me $12,000 toward the $34,000 you stole from my retirement. $22,000 remaining. Additionally, you've committed to paying consolidated credit recovery $6,038 monthly for the next year to settle the fraudulent credit card debt. The numbers on the page told the story more brutally than words could. Their monthly obligations, their income, the gap between them. Your total monthly debt payments, $8,438. Your total household income after taxes, approximately $4,800. I looked at them directly. You're underwater by nearly $4,000 every month. That's unsustainable. What do you want from us? Paul's voice was barely above a whisper. I want you to face a choice, I said. You can stay in this house and continue making payments, living within the constraints of the consequences you created. Or you can leave now and make those same payments from somewhere else. The debts don't disappear either way. The promissory note you signed survives bankruptcy. The collections agency has a legal agreement. Your credit is destroyed for years. I paused, letting them absorb the totality of their situation. If you stay, you follow my rules. You pay every dollar you owe. You work as many jobs as necessary to meet your obligations. You live honestly. You respect this house and the fact that it's my property, not yours. And when Tracy and Glenn turn 18, you let them make their own choices about their relationship with me. Zandra's face crumpled, not quite tears, but close. The woman who'd posted about designer handbags in Greenwich, real estate now confronting a future of retail work and debt payments. Paul's shoulders sagged. All the defiance bled out of him. We'll stay. Say it properly, I said quietly. He looked up, met my eyes. For the first time in 3 years, I saw something like understanding there. Not remorse exactly, but recognition. We'll stay. We'll make the payments. We'll follow your rules. His voice was flat, defeated. We don't have any other choice. You had choices, I said. You made them when you forged my signature. You're living with them now. After they left, I asked Richard to stay. Tracy and Glenn remained as well. On June 24th, I told them, I'm updating my will. Richard had drafted the documents. 50% of my estate goes into a trust for Tracy and Glenn, accessible when they turn 25. The other 50% goes to a charitable foundation for historical preservation. I looked at my grandchildren. Paul and Zandra get nothing. They've already taken their inheritance and spent it. Now they're paying it back. Tracy's eyes were wet, but she nodded. Glenn reached over and squeezed my hand. The house, my investments, my collections, everything protected, everything documented. When I'm gone, you'll be taken care of. I paused, but that's a long time from now. Right now, we have a pocket watch to finish restoring. June 24th. I sat in Richard's office as the notary witnessed my signature on the new will. Every page, every clause, ensuring that the people who'd tried to steal my legacy would receive nothing from it. June 28th arrived on a Sunday evening. The heat had broken, leaving behind comfortable warmth and clear skies. Tracy, Glenn, and I sat in my workshop, the 1887 pocket watch spread across my workbench in pieces. We'd been working on it for weeks, each component carefully restored, each gear precisely fitted. "This is the last piece," Tracy said, holding the tiny balance wheel. "Once this goes in, it should run." "Then let's see if all our work paid off," I said. Together, we assembled the final components. Glenn held the magnifying glass. Tracy positioned the balance wheel. I secured it with a jeweler's screwdriver. Each turn, measured and deliberate. When the last screw tightened, I wound the crown. 3 full turns, then 4. The watch began to tick, steady, rhythmic, precise. 138 years after it was made, the mechanism ran as smoothly as the day it left the factory. Tracy grinned. Glenn laughed. I felt something in my chest loosen. Not quite joy, but close. "Grandpa," Tracy said, watching the second hand sweep around the dial, "did you ever think about just forgiving them? Mom and Dad. Just letting it go?" I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness and consequences aren't opposites. I can forgive them for being weak, for being greedy, for making terrible choices. But forgiveness doesn't mean erasing consequences. They stole from me. They need to repay that debt. That's justice. And after, when they've paid it all, back then they'll have learned that actions matter, that you can't steal and manipulate and lie without facing the cost. I looked at the watch, its hands moving steadily forward. That's the lesson worth teaching. Glenn picked up the watch, held it to his ear, listening to the ticking. "You gave them the biggest chance possible. The chance to become honest." "Exactly," I said. "What they do with that chance is their choice, not mine." Upstairs, I could hear Paul and Zandra moving around, getting ready for another week of work, another round of payments, another month of consequences. Their dream house had dropped to $980,000, $360,000 less than they'd planned. Their credit was destroyed, their social aspirations demolished, their future mortgaged to repay debts they'd created. And down in my basement workshop, surrounded by the precise mechanics of restored timepieces and the grandchildren who'd chosen truth over lies, I felt the satisfaction of justice properly served. The watch ticked steadily, marking seconds into minutes, minutes into hours, each moment measured, each gear in its place, each component working exactly as it should. Some people spend their lives trying to take shortcuts, to steal what they haven't earned, to manipulate and lie their way to prosperity. They never learn that broken trust, like a broken watch, requires careful, patient work to repair, and some damage, once done, leaves permanent marks. I smiled, listening to the rhythmic ticking of 1887 craftsmanship, brought back to life through patience and precision. Justice restored, balance maintained, time moving forward, second by second, toward whatever came next. If you've ever been underestimated or betrayed by someone you trusted, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of people who turned the tables on those who wronged them. And don't forget to share your own experiences in the comments below. Your stories might just become our next video. Until next time, remember that justice sometimes comes not with a bang, but with the steady, inexorable tick of a clock.